Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Media Literacy Now, this month's Edie and Neal's Book Club event produced by ALA Editions. For this event, we encourage submitting questions using the Q&A function on your screens while each of the four presentations are underway. This time, we'll plan to address questions with the presenters immediately following each of their respective presentations. In the order from which you'll hear from them, today's presenting authors are Belinha de Abreu, author of Teaching Media Literacy and Media Literacy for Justice, Lessons for Changing the World; Paula Younger, author of Social Media and Healthcare Information and Using Web 2.0 for Health Information; Dana Statton Thompson and Stephanie Beene, co-authors of A Slow Approach to Visual Literacy in Higher Education, Lesson Plans for Critical Discernment, and the ACRL title on Framing the Visual Literacy Pedagogy in Academic Libraries and Information Spaces. And finally, Scott Spicer, author of Student-Created Media, Designing Research, Learning, and Skill-Building Experiences. As many of you have asked, this event will be recorded and posted to the Maine American Library Association YouTube page later today. Books by the presenting authors are available for purchase at alastore.ala.org with bulk sale discount and textbook desktop queries welcome at editionsmarketing@ala.org. To guarantee the best discount offers, be sure to join the ALA or to renew your membership. Visit ala.org/membership to learn more about ALA membership. Okay, let's get started with Belinha de Abreu presenting on Media Literacy for Justice. All right, welcome, Belinha.
Thank you. Let me share my screen with all of you. Thank you, ALA, for putting this on, because I think of all times in our world, media literacy is needed most of all times. But I wanted to sort of take us through what that actually means. And so I am going to present certainly some of the issues that are in my book about why teaching media literacy is super important and why it's important in terms of justice issues as well. But I wanted to start us off with a definition, just so that we're all on the same page. One of the things that has come up over the course of the time since I've written the books is that people have said, media literacy has a very confusing definition. Even my husband has said the same thing. And so I have come to putting a definition that I think is just more easily communicatable to other people. So really, for me, media literacy is the ability to think more deeply about the media, to process it, to verify and understand its role in our lives, both positive and negative, because I think it's really important that when we think about the media, that we think about it in both aspects. It's not all bad, it's not all good, and we get sort of lost in the weeds a little bit when it comes to this, when people start to say it's all bad stuff out there, when we know that truthfully, there's a lot of really amazing things. Unfortunately, though, we've been confronted with media moments that have sort of taken us into various cycles. Some, once again, that have highlighted some of the more difficult things that have been happening in our world, and some that are also highlighting some of the more problematic media choices or solutions or non-solutions. And so smartphone bans has been certainly one of the topics of conversation that have come up in our media sphere. Certainly schools that are dropping out from having smartphone usage because of what people consider to be, the negative piece of it, which of course there is that. It definitely received a lot of popularity and discussion when Jonathan Haidt wrote his book, The Anxious Generation. But beyond that, before even that, there's also been discussions about why it is that smartphones have added or detracted from things that are happening in classrooms around the country. We've had the Free Speech Act in the UK, and I always try to put a little bit of a global spin on this, because even when it comes to smartphone issues, this is a global issue, not just a US issue, but it's important to have some context in relation to things that are happening around the world. Certainly, adding to that is media sensations. The biggest one, of course, being Taylor Swift, from her music to the minute she got engaged and she broke the internet, to all of these issues related to what media sensations do to us, don't do to us, offer to us, the possibilities and the distractions as well. Certainly political discourse, we've had a lot of that in the last probably several years, but I think it's been highlighted severely in the most recent years. especially because of the issues that we've seen certainly in the last few years that have included things like campus protests, the canceling of research, canceling of books, the canceling of people, all of that. The wars that are happening around the world that have also added to these debates in the media, and also the issues of climate that we can't ignore. And so, what has shifted and changed? Well, the media has shifted and changed in our worlds for sure. We don't all have traditional forms of ways of engaging with each other in the same way. We don't have a common media source. And that has added to the disconnect that we're seeing with people and how they engage with information. So, we know that newspapers have sort of taken a step back, although they exist in a digital space, but they're not that common thing that used to show up at our door. We know that there's been a discussion about the generation that is, using the cell phone has, there's an entitlement piece that have kind of gone along with it or not. And that has continued. This idea where technology is taking us and shaping us, and it's disconnect from the world, but more of this interconnect with the technology that is losing perhaps some of its humanity in the way in which we engage with each other. The issues of data and the fact that we aren't controlling the data as much as it's being controlled by all these other people who are then also controlling what it is that we're seeing and also dismantling the world in which we understand as common truths or acknowledgments. And certainly we're seeing that we aren't able to foster it into a way that is making sense. And so we've had a lot of issues with that. We've had the TikTok problem. Are we having it? Are we not going to have it? Are we selling it? Are we keeping it? Who's in control of it? And are we getting these bits of information in a way that is also not providing the full context of a picture of a story? We are living in a meta universe. We know that that's a part of the conversation that is happening most recently with Meta. There was another piece of another rollout of where AI is going to go with that and how that's going to affect us. So ChatGPT already has done that for us. It's changed the way in which we engage. It's changed the way in which we are able to work with students, work with ourselves. And there's a lot of questions about how much of this is a feeding into a world where now we don't have critical thinkers any longer. So that's a question in there. Artificial intelligence is here. We know it's getting bigger, and we need to have more discussions about that and what that means in terms of how we're going to employ it in a way that works with us in education spaces and public spaces and public libraries and any type of library, academic libraries and so forth. And how do we keep that with the idea of the human in mind at the forefront of it? We know that all of these technologies have been weaponized in different ways, and it's been weaponized through our political system. It's been weaponized in terms of just the way in which we communicate or the lack of communication, frankly. With all of these technologies, you would have thought that we would have had a better communication model in place, but unfortunately, that has definitely not been the case. It has changed the way in which we delve into our presidential elections. This came out with The Economist, and it reminds me very much of Marshall McLuhan and The Media and the Message, and how much the medium has changed the message, and the message has changed the medium as well. So we have to think about that. This back and forth that is evolving in front of us is changing how we talk to each other, especially when we live in spaces that were never offline, which has been some of the worry that we have seen in our communities and our schools, and it's a dialogue that we continue to have. It also has turned to the shift of why we are all of a sudden locking up phones in schools. I know that in the media literacy world, there's a little bit of a divide about whether this is a good idea, whether it's a bad idea. I think if you've been in education in the last 5 years, you would say that this has turned out to be a very good idea. I've been in a school working and doing some work with this particular year, and I've seen a massive change in the way in which students engage because the cell phone is not the primary source for students. Doesn't mean that there doesn't come any issues, and it doesn't mean that it's working completely, but it is a source definitely of how we want to see things. And then, of course, the question comes into, what are we getting out there, and how does that make us think about truth in terms of information? And that is something that we need to think about too. Is truth dead? Do we actually have common spaces for truth? And this is where I think the value of media literacy education in particular must come in. We can't forget how much in the the value of the work that we do, especially in libraries, when it comes to seeking out truth, to finding out information, to providing these sources of information. So that part of access is super important, but also what are we reading that gets us to these common spaces where truth exists? So issues for consideration as we're going through, I've already mentioned some of these, but I also want to just sort of delve a little bit deeper into that. We know that we live in silos and that there's polarization in our world. We've seen it in massive ways. So the question becomes, how can we spark more curiosity in each other? And when do we start talking to each other? Most recently, I read a book by Monica Guzman. I never thought of it that way, and I do recommend it. I actually have my college students read this book. And she writes, fail to notice your assumptions and they might harden into lies. Turn them into questions and they'll get you closer to the truth. I think that's the curiosity piece that is super important. How did we get here? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? What if it's not working? Let's talk about that. Because I think all of us would say right now that some things are definitely not working. So it's an important consideration to make when we're seeing the things that are evolving around our world. Another aspect is the issues of censorship and cancel culture. For quite a long time, before all of a sudden things have gotten highlighted as much as they have, I've often said to people that all we're doing is touching upon the same issues on two sides of the same coin. We stop people from speaking, we censor people, and this has created sort of this unfortunate dichotomy where we are not able to address issues that need to be addressed. It concerns me in particular because when we talk about, First Amendments and we talk about free speech and we talk about book banning and we talk about all these issues that are super important to us, we really need to think about what it is that we're saying when both of these things are present in front of us. The AI piece has to be a super important part of the dialogue because there's an ethics piece of this, there's a humanity piece of this, which I've already mentioned, but there's also the idea of truth within AI that I think can become very messy. We know about the issues of deep fakes. We definitely know that it's so easy to manipulate language. How do we stay ahead of it? Those are things for us to really think about as we are moving ourselves forward. The idea of who's consuming who. What is it that we are doing when we're on our cell phones so much that we aren't seeing what's present and real in front of us? When will we take it back? And when will we take back our own thought processes instead of allowing these smartphones to really be the ones that direct our thinking? We know our information has been filtered down, and we also know that the algorithm follows the things that we are most interested in. So that means that it's also not providing us with the opportunity to outsource for other ideas or outsource for thinking that's outside of our own. So we need to be able to open that up and have that as part of the dialogue too. There was a piece that was written by a number of higher education educators that I thought I needed to share along with all the pieces of things that I just wanted to discuss, which I know we're doing very quickly. But the idea of civil discourse needs to be also fundamentally a part of the discussion of media literacy. Civil discourse requires openness to hard truths, a commitment to facts as a public good, recognition and discussion of what may be perceived as hateful or offensive, and understanding that honorable people may deeply disagree. I think we've forgotten that piece. Honorable people may deeply disagree. And I think this is something that we need to acknowledge as part of the work of media literacy education, because in the end, what we do know for sure is that words matter and context matters. And both seem to have gotten lost in the way in which we discuss or consider civility in our country. And I think it's an important piece of the work that we must continue to do. With that, I wanted to just close out with two items that I just wanted to mention, which is that I am hosting the International Media Literacy Research Symposium, which is going to be held in Italy this coming summer. And we still have possibilities for people who want to come and present their work on media and information literacy. So I would really would love to invite you all to certainly submit and to come to Italy and present. And I also wanted to mention that the International Council of Media Literacy is offering a Media Literacy Innovation Award in media literacy education, and the applications are due on December 1st. So I look forward to speaking with all of you and to sharing more of these ideas. And certainly, I've given you only a preface or a tiny little glimpse, a synopsis of some of the ideas that I've also been struggling with since the books have been written. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, Belinha. That was wonderful. And maybe a question for you as an instructor who works with college students. What ideas have you been fielding from the students about the different questions that you've raised, especially now as compared to when you published the book a few years ago?
So I think one of the things that surprised me the most was really how much they feel that the media has drained their mental health. And we always talk about it. I mean, the media talks about it, and you get to this point where you think maybe the media is overstating it, but they talk about it. And they talk about it by the way in which they also feel that the smartphone has become a distraction, by the fact that when they're on campus, you walk into their common areas and nobody's talking to each other or engaging with each other. It's literally just that everyone is on their cell phones, and they really are striving to step outside of that. I find it really interesting. They'll ask me things, what they call adulting questions, which I love. And to be honest with you, often I'm sort of surprised at how they're everyday things that you would think they would have picked up on, but they haven't, because it's not a part of their regular discourse. It's not in their social media feeds. So they're also trying to find those places and spaces where they can get accurate information. And a lot of that is also people that they're going to that they trust now to get that information. And so I actually value when a student says that to me and they actually preface it with an adulting question, because that to me means they're comfortable to ask the question, and I want them to feel that way.
What are you seeing happening around campuses in terms of building community that will allow people to do digital detox and experience the acquisition of knowledge from other people in person?
Yeah, I actually think this is the struggle in colleges and universities, because you want to treat them as adults and say, okay, you know how to handle yourself in class. But what you end up finding out is they do, but they don't know how to detach themselves from their phones. And so I do see a lot of professors putting in little notations about, you don't need a smartphone in my class, you don't need your computer in class. In fact, the blue books have come back in a big wave. I think, I know there's been an article about that. I think there was an article, several articles actually in the New York Times. There's been articles in the Atlantic, and there are people like, well, that's the most ridiculous thing. And I'm like, but you know what? It's actually the way in which a professor can look at a student's writing and see it in the context that they're actually writing without worrying about the chat GPT, the AI driven materials, and all of that. The most important thing I feel that as what we need to do is to remember that college students are still young, this is K through 12. We want to learn. We want them to learn as they're going. We don't want that the AI takes away the learning opportunities, and they don't know the difference. So they don't know that when they're submitting a ChatGPT thing, it's not nuanced. It's not in their language. It's providing knowledge that is not knowledgeable really to them. They don't have the background information for that. So they're actually putting themselves in a point where it's not functioning for them well, but they're assuming that it is. Whereas with adults, I think that you have that possibility because you have more experience and you can critique the AI and segment it and make it work for you in a way that actually will enhance your work. But they don't have that ability yet because they don't have knowledge.
Although what's so interesting is increasingly instructors are telling students, we want you to learn how to use AI effectively because it is the future, but also putting the responsibility on them to
Right.
not plagiarize and not abuse it. And so it's
Right.
a bit of a conflicting challenge that is developing here. We
Right.
got some other questions here in the chat, one from Michelle Visco. Do you have practical examples of assignments to help teach media literacy skills?
Many. Actually, but what I will say is I think there are media moments that happen every single day that you can take into your classroom. Frankly, every time something is happening in the world, I find there's opportunities to have an engaged dialogue in the classroom with students, whether it's, something monetary, or there's been a shift in the way in which, people are thinking about ideas. I think the most important thing is to provide a space in your classroom where students can ask you questions, especially questions that they are worried about, that they've heard from the media. That part, I think, is something that we haven't done a really good job of addressing. Students come in with a lot of fears that they perceive because of either television programs they've watched, movies, news stories they've heard, conversations they've heard, little snippets coming at them from their TikToks. They don't know if it's real or not real, and they really need to find someone who they can have that dialogue with so that there isn't this worry lingering with them. I also think, we need to address more how images impact people. There's a lot of bullying questions that come into play that people will address. I think the leveling up of that is super important because, when you talk about images with kids, we're talking about, how you take pictures, what's a good picture, what's a bad picture. And then, what happens when you start adding layers to that, when you add filters to that, when you're only taking a picture of a particular angle, who's represented, who's misrepresented, who's not in the picture. Like there's the layering up of all of those. So there's plenty of ways in which we can get into some deeper conversations, starting with the very simple things when they're younger and then moving into the more deeper as they get older.
Totally. And I think a couple of our other presenters will get more into the visual literacy angle and just the role that
Correct.
empathy plays in teaching critical discernment. So you're absolutely on point there. Thanks.
Yeah.
Another question, anonymous. What kinds of adulting questions do students ask? What are some examples? And you delved into that a little bit just now.
Yeah, I think, I've had some really serious ones where some's related to, images that were taken by boyfriend, girlfriend. How can they get those pictures back? And what are these, what rights do they have as young adults to reclaim their digital spaces and reclaim their digital lives? I've had some really interesting conversations with students who are upset because they realize that their parents have put their whole lives online and they didn't want it online and they want those pictures taken offline. And what can they do about that? They ask about ways in which that they can be more self advocates in terms of their own mental health in relation to a number of these things. And then there's been basic things like, I want to take an Amtrak train. I don't really understand how the ticketing system works, Like I know this sounds really simple, but all of those questions come into play. Voting. I want to vote. I know the process, but I really don't understand the whole thing, or where can I get more information and all of that. So I think all of those have all been adulting questions I've received over the years.
Very cool. Another anonymous question. How do we teach media literacy, in quotes, to older generations who didn't grow up with the internet in their pocket? And I think in that question is a little bit of an idea about what it means to be older, which you may have your own thoughts on.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I almost feel like the media has done a little bit of disservice to our older population. Let's just do it that way. Because I find that they definitely are more invested in traditional media. So we have to be aware of that. If we're talking about, our seniors, they're definitely they're in the traditional media. They're the doesn't mean that the internet isn't a problem. It is. But I think with the internet is more of a problem because they're receiving messages that sound like they're real when they're not. And we really need to talk about how do we actually teach them some skills in relation to that so that they don't get, it's not a fraud thing. It's not, what spam is, all of that. There's that level. But I also find that there's a historical awareness that they have that younger generations don't have. And I think there's gaps, like, right, there's these gaps in our younger generation because they don't have the same historical context that our older generation has. But in between that, there's all work that needs to be done for everybody. Like we all need to remember that it's our responsibility to make choices when it comes to using media, whatever media we choose. So it's also our choice to choose to share something or not to share something. It's our responsibility also to know the differences between something that might be a true statement and something that's not. But the problem is that people have sort of left the responsibility part on the back end because they're like, oh, this sounds like really interesting. Let me share it before you find out if it's true. I always have some of my best conversations, believe it or not, in the weirdest spaces. I'm in a yoga class and somebody will ask me a question about, what do I do? And then I have to explain what media literacy is in a way that makes sense, right? And I can't use a academic definition to talk to everybody about what media literacy is. I have to talk about, well, how do you see the media in the world around you? And do you see there is a problem? And then we engage in different conversations. I'll be at a store and something will come up and it'll be things like prices or whatever it may be. And someone will say, oh, well, I blame it on this. And I'm like, well, let's talk about why these things are as they are, right? So it's moments and opportunities. But I also want to say that and preface that by saying it's moments and opportunities when moments and opportunities are present. You don't put yourself in places when someone is so angry about something that you can't have a dialogue with them. You have to wait for things to become more of a calm factor, to be honest with you, because certainly in the last couple of weeks, I feel like the temperature has risen to a level that's been really difficult. And so it's really important for us to just realize that we need some time and it's okay to take a step back and then have a deeper conversation later when necessary. It's just, no one said that when you became a media literacy person that you needed to run head on into every problem. Sometimes you need to watch the problem as it's playing out to know how to address it in front of you.
Absolutely. We've got time for a couple more questions live, and then we have a few others that if Belinha is able to answer in
Sure.
writing in the chat, she'll do it that way. A nice second to what you said about different audiences and how they have to be approached with a different definition of media literacy. From
Right.
Chloe Brown, do you have any recommendations for making adults receptive to media literacy and encouraging them to be skeptical of the information they see in the media? Students are a captive audience for this info, but in my public library, we see a lot of patients succumbing to misinformation and disinformation, and I have yet to find a good way to discuss that with them.
You know what I always ask? So I'll give you an example. So last week, I'm going to do a pop culture thing because usually, actually, pop culture is a great way to sometimes engage in some really deep conversations. But last week, for example, everybody probably have seen this. Nicole Kidman is filed for divorce from Keith Urban. And I remember when someone said it to me, I looked at them and I said, how do you know that's true? I said, what was the source? I want to know the source. And that sometimes is how I get people to really think. And they'll be like, oh, well, I just saw it on my feed. I said, okay, let's see if it's in someplace else. So then we look to see if it's someplace else. And if it's more than multiple places, I'm like, okay, well, this generates, okay, this is a chance that this is completely possible here. So then I'm like, let's wait and see though. 24 hours, if it's real, everybody's going to carry it, which of course within 24 hours it blew up, of course. So big things like that, I always ask that question. How did you get that information? Especially because I find that certainly with this work, I work at that level where I'm always like, let's find out more about that. Do you know what I mean? But I think that that's actually the level that we need to teach our students at. Let's find out more because they are in that space where it's fun to gossip, it's fun to share stuff, but they don't understand there's a consequence for that. So we need to set up these parameters. Well, if you're sharing something that's wrong, what's the consequence of that? And take it up to, okay, now let's talk about real life things. If we get this wrong in the real world, what is the consequence of something like that? And that's why one of my slides says words matter, context matters, because often people lose track of both. Saying something is one thing, not understanding what you said is a whole other level of things. And I also think that we need to give grace to people who don't know because they just don't know. This is something my college students struggle with and have said to me that sometimes they don't speak in class because they're afraid of offending somebody, even though they have a legitimate question, they just don't know. And they want someone to answer them to the best of their knowledge. I think we need to give grace grace and space for those things to happen in a classroom, in our libraries, and to not be offended by the question. Stop being offended by the question. Let the question be asked and see if we can direct to an answer that really provides the kind of inclusivity that we want it to provide, but more than anything, the actual knowledge base for it.
Absolutely. One last question for live about audiences. And this one is from Peter Priskia. How would you recommend we focus on informing those who are not in schools where they are in a milieu where learning is present or not a main purposeful focus? I have family members being fooled by AI Google summaries on top of searches or images generated by AI on Facebook. So how do we talk to our families and our friends when we're not at work about, being more literate in that way?
I think it's the same way that you would engage about anything. It'd be like, let me see that picture. How do you know that's real? Like, really have the conversation. Where do you think that came from? Let's look and see if we can find another picture of that. Let's figure out what the whole story is about before, and have that conversation. I mean, listen, this isn't. My mom's 94, so I have conversations with her about some of the things that she sees on the television screen all the time. I'm like, oh, I don't think that's quite right. Let's see if we can find out what that is. I think we need to be gentle with certain people to make sure that, we don't want to, people don't want to feel like they're stupid, right? And they don't want to be told that they're wrong, which is probably the bigger issue in and of itself. But I think what we want them to know is that there's actually a better answer or a better solution or a better way to get that kind of information. And I think if you show people, if you're there with your phone and you see something, hey, like I found this instead, what do you think? Have that kind of openness to keep questioning, be curious. How did you get that? Where did you find that information? Okay, why do you believe that's true? Because the other part of this is that people come in with their own biases, right? We all have to acknowledge that we all carry them. To think that we don't is completely erroneous, right? And our media comes with that too. Even when we talk about, and I always speak about, Walter Cronkite gave us some of the best factual news ever, and he did, but he also carried his own bias. We all know that, but he was more fact-driven in his approach, which is something that we're missing from what we see in mainstream media. Frankly, because of that, that's why we get the little 5-second TikToks that are broken down where they don't have those ability to actually show you that there is more context to the story. Push on the context piece, push on there's something, it's got to be bigger than this, can't be this simple, right? And I think that's the kind of conversation that you need to have in order to engage further.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Belinha, for a wonderful presentation and for taking all of these great questions. If you are interested in more books from Belinha, Dr. Abreu, you can find them linked in the chat. I believe my great colleague Rob Christopher has posted a link to where you can find Belinha's books. Thanks
Thank you.
And next up, we have Paula Younger, who is here to talk about media and healthcare information. Let me see if I can get you on, Paula.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We're so happy. And we can see you too.
Okay, great. Okay, so we had a few issues with the technology. I've discovered that our IT people, when we moved across to Windows 11, which was in the last couple of weeks, they've taken away some of the things we can do. So I'll just share my screen. So fingers crossed this will work. Okay.
And there we go. If you'll just move that into slideshow mode.
Great. Yep. Okay. Can you see the presentation now?
We can see it.
Fabulous. Okay, so my name is Paula Younger. I'm a library manager within the NHS, which is the health system in the UK. I've tried to make the presentation not too UK centric, because the things I'm going to talk about are relevant to all of us, no matter what sector we're in, no matter what part of the world we're in, no matter what language we speak. This affects all of us. So healthcare information in the UK, the majority of organisations that provide it would be charities or non-profits, universities, research organisations, pharmaceutical companies, and the National Health Service. The National Health Service is paid for by a combination of our taxes, government grants, donations, and research. And the majority of services are currently free at the point of delivery. So we do pay for them. It's a different model to the one that many other countries have. So health literacy is really an issue at the moment in the UK and around the world as well. And health literacy is defined by the World Health Organization as being able to look at information about healthcare and actually understand how it applies to you. Now, that could be information about a condition. It could be information about a medication. It could be information about an intervention. So something that's not medication, but can actually help you cope with a health condition or a health situation. And one of the things we're finding in the UK is that misinformation is absolutely an issue right now. Fake news. So I think we've all seen a lot of the information or misinformation that is coming through in the mainstream media at the moment and in social media. Fake news isn't new. One of the areas that we often raise with our students, so within the hospital that I work in, we're a teaching hospital, so we see a lot of medical students, we see a lot of physician associate students, nursing students, physiotherapy students, and obviously in the professions that they're going into, their information has to be absolutely correct because the consequences can be literally fatal. So back in the 1950s, one of the most notorious aspects of fake news was actually smoking and cancer. So the tobacco companies knew that smoking actually caused cancer. There were 4 major studies that were carried out then, and yet they actually suppressed that. And in the 50s, you would actually see advertisements where you would even have doctors smoking and saying, this is great, it will open your lungs. And that's certainly what my father believed. Having grown up in the 1930s, had a lot of asthmatic issues, and he genuinely believed that smoking was actually good for his lungs, which we find quite astonishing these days. So the book that I wrote was about social media and about healthcare information in social media, and inevitably that actually meant that there was a lot of misinformation. So I've just put a few of media brands up there, and one of the issues is that anybody can produce a reel or transmit a tweet or put a post up there. And the theory is that if you have a book that's produced, a medical book that's produced, it will have gone through an editorial and quality control process, and the same with articles. However, as COVID-19 showed, sometimes that peer review, particularly for articles that appear in medical journals, is not perhaps as robust as we might like it to be. And I'll come back to that in a couple of slides. So information specialists and use of social media, particularly in the health service. So often we end up being early adopters, and that's partly because we will have clinicians come to us and ask us for information on all kinds of things they've maybe heard about on the news. They don't necessarily have the time to actually go and investigate those and research them. So they will come and ask us what's going on. So ChatGPT is a good example, AI, large language models, etc. We're starting to see those queries come through. We've also learned that choosing the right tool for the job is important. So at the trust I work at, believe it or not, until very recently, our own Facebook was actually blocked on our internet access. And IT is a major barrier within the National Health Service in some parts of the UK. The other aspect that we've found that we need to really get across to our medics when they're trying to reach, well, in their case, patients, in our case, patrons, they need to look at the demographics of the audience. So my generation, Facebook was the best thing ever. With a few earlier ones as well. With the younger generation, so Generation Z, if you want to use that term, then we're finding that TikTok is very popular, AI is very popular. It'll be interesting to see where we go with that. We've already experienced barriers this afternoon with the technology, so with the hardware rather than the software, which has been interesting. And the critical thinking, and so what was just mentioned in the previous presentation, the critical thinking and the appraisal, actually looking at where your information comes from, who is it that's actually put that information together, what is it saying, when was it produced? In medicine, there's a tendency to try to stick to information within the last 5 years or within the last 10 years. So when we have our students and our researchers and our doctors who are putting that information together, it needs to be as up to date as possible. Millions and millions of medical articles are written every year. And then if you look at social media and how many more posts are actually coming through, or reels, or any other production that's coming through on social media, it is an incredible amount of information. So actually trying to be very discerning about what you're using is really, really important. How has the information been presented? So again, on TikTok, you often get these very, very short reels, 50 seconds, some of them. You cannot get a great deal of information across in 50 seconds. It's just not possible. And then the other thing that we try and get our users to think about is, why is the information actually being produced and shared and put out there? So one of the areas that is obviously a major area of concern is patient information. Now, we do make available many databases and many resources to our users, our students, and also to patients. So the patient information tends to be written in much more straightforward language. They try to take, there's actually a panel of patients who look at that information and try to make sure that it's as straightforward as possible. It's as unconfusing as it can be. Sometimes that works well, sometimes it doesn't. So patient information, the good aspects of the literacy side of things, the social media literacy side of things, is that it's a very cost-effective way. So social media is a cost-effective way to get your message out there. Most people now would carry some kind of phone. So even the older generation, so even if I think of our patients who come through this hospital, where our hospital is based, there is an older population. It's a post-industrial area of the northwest of England, and the people who will come and ask for information didn't grow up with the internet. They didn't even come in as what I learned was called a digital immigrant. They've actually, so for them, it's almost like science fiction, some of the things that they're seeing. And for our medics, they need to be the bridge between the information that's available and the patient. And then for us as information specialists, we then need to try and be the bridge between the information that's out there and making sure that our clinicians have the most accurate, the most evidence-based information that they can. So by the time they get to qualified doctor status or qualified nurse or registered physiotherapist, usually they're pretty good at discerning. We then have our students who come in and are at the stage where some of them believe everything that they see on the internet. And that means that we have a lot of work to do. A little bit later, I'll come back to an experience we had very recently. So those are the good aspects. The bad aspects of social media. So we very often within medical information, we see that papers that are written and published in scientific journals that you would hope have gone through this peer review process, where other experts will look at it, decide whether it needs to be amended, decide whether the evidence in there, the statistics, etc., actually back up what is written in those articles, what is produced. Unfortunately, a lot of them end up getting retracted. And there's actually one that I've read about this morning. So apple cider vinegar, which is apparently an absolute wonderful cure-all. There was an article that was published in one of the British Medical Journal publications. And it stated that it was excellent for obesity. It could really help people with diabetes. However, that article has been withdrawn because the number of people that they looked at in that study was very small. It was only 12 people. So that article has been retracted, and there is a whole website, Retraction Watch, where you can go and have a look and see what has been withdrawn. But the difficulty there is many people will have shared that information on social media, Many people will have referenced those articles in their own articles. So actually trying to get our users to think about, well, is this really as evidence-based as it seems? It's a bit of an uphill climb, this one. I wish I had a straightforward answer to it, but it certainly keeps us busy. And then the frankly terrifying, so on TikTok, and I'm still in two minds about TikTok, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. A few years ago, there was a situation where a dare was put round for mostly young people to decide whether they were going to eat Tide pods or not. So the laundry pods that Tide make. It did not have good outcomes, I think it's fair to say. And the other thing that we see regularly is Reddit rabbit holes. So people will put information on there that is just made up. Often it's an opinion, or it's a deliberate attempt to actually stir up a reaction. So multimedia, the other thing that we're seeing now very much is that as AI develops, all these amazing things that you can do with AI, particularly if it's multimedia AI. So if you're creating images, if you're creating video, you're creating audio, so the cloning of voices, that's an aspect that we need to keep an eye on to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where people think that some of our medics have said things they haven't, or some of our CEOs have said things that they haven't, some of our government ministers have said things that they haven't. I think trying to teach, certainly our younger generation, interestingly, but not only them, what the difference is, what's real, what isn't real. Misinformation, so we've all seen these, I think, in the last year or so. Vaccinations, that's something that certainly during COVID, there was a lot of misinformation about. We also had the measles vaccine a good few years ago now. And we're now finding, and I think this is being repeated across the world from the research that I've done, we're now finding that actually the numbers of measles cases are going up, all traceable back to that misinformation those years ago. So the long-term influence of people taking on board information that they haven't actually checked out can be really serious. Influencers or experts. So again, we've had quite a few influencers standing up and saying all kinds of things about vaccines. Yes, you should take them. No, you shouldn't take them. And when the experts come along, so for example, when we have our health experts who come along and actually try to put the record straight, sometimes they come up against an astonishing amount of resistance with that. And we always try to get our users to try to think about what is the agenda here? Who is it that actually benefits? The other thing that we're starting to see, patient lived experience. So within the health service, the patient is at the center. And there is now there are a lot more platforms now where patients can actually share their experience. So the concept of the expert patient, but again, it's one person's experience. So actually looking across several patients' experience gives a better understanding of how a condition may affect a particular user group. One of the worst examples of misinformation that I came across when I was researching the chapter was Surgisphere. So back in early 2020, there were huge levels of panic around COVID-19, this incredibly strange condition that had apparently come out of nowhere. The vaccines had not yet been created. And there was a tiny little company called Surgisphere who claimed that they had data that could help find a cure. Now, some of the big journals, even the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, which is regarded as pretty much the top medical journal in the world, seemed to be taken in. And it was actually social media. So it was a lot of, there was a particular blog on social media that looked at this data that didn't actually really exist. They looked at the methodology. They looked at whether the data was any good. Lots of papers were retracted, and there were actually some trials that were paused, including at the World Health Organization. That particular company, I'm not entirely sure what's happened to it, but it's certainly not very prominent anymore, shall we say. But the damage that that could potentially have done just because they were pretending they had information that they didn't really have. It's just horrific. It's absolutely horrifying. And then from December on in 2020, once the vaccine started to become available, the conspiracy theories that went round were just pretty crazy, really. Is it 5G? Does it have a chip in it? There are all these things that the governments of the world are trying to do. And I think for our medics, it made a very difficult situation even more difficult. So that misinformation really had a knock-on effect, both from a professional and a personal viewpoint as well. There are a lot of current controversies at the moment as well. So artificial intelligence, we can't get away from it. It's definitely here to stay, whatever form it ends up in. So large language models like ChatGPT, where they predict effectively from a body of literature. When I say literature, I mean, in this case, I mean medical literature. So they try to predict what the next words in the sequence are likely to be. I've certainly seen it hallucinate several times in terms of asking it about particular authors. It has made up, so this is ChatGPT, it has made up several books that authors definitely did not write. The deep fakes, so one of the most notorious is at the moment is Tilly Norwood, who is the actor. I use the term very loosely. And that image has been created from a composite. And it kind of, when you look at the footage, it definitely has a kind of uncanny valley effect in there. And I'll come back to that in a couple of slides as well. So other controversies, attention spans, the 15 to 60 seconds. So apparently that's the sweet spot on TikTok. You can get a little bit of information across. Radicalization and cyberbullying. So 4chan, which is supposed to be it's not supposed to be for minors. It's only supposed to be for adults. It may be defunct for the under 18s, but a lot of the attitudes, so the misogyny, the racism, the other completely inappropriate attitudes have started to seep into areas of mainstream social media. And that's certainly quite worrying in the UK. We're seeing the rise of some very, very unpleasant aspects of society. Not quite sure if the government has come up with a policy yet, but all we can do on a personal level is try to explain that those attitudes are not appropriate. Trolling, where people are deliberately provocative, they put comments online to just try and get a response, and the misinformation and retraction of papers and other information I've already touched upon. So our role, information professionals, and this is where, certainly around AI, there's quite a lot of nervousness within the health librarian community about, and other communities as well, and other sectors as well, about whether we are actually going to, basically whether we will still have jobs. And everything is starting to point to the fact that we will still have work, but it will be different work to how it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. And this applies no matter what discipline you're in, no matter what sector you're in, no matter where you're located. So we really need to try and encourage critical thinking and critical appraisal. So that is a particular method that we use within the health librarian world to try and make people look at the articles that they want to use to back up their decisions, to back up their research. There's actually a week-long course that the University of Oxford does for those who really want to sit and look at statistics for 5 days. And then there are shorter courses, which would be the kind of things that we do in my type of service, where we would do 2 or 3 hours where we just skim the surface. Signposting people to evidence-based sources of information. So information that we know has been put together by experts. It will tell you which doctors have put that information together. You will be able to go and look at the hospital that they work at. You'll be able to go and look at the information they've put together. And you can also see when it's been updated. So there are several databases out there. that have that information. Signposting to ethical considerations of content creation and curation. So again, we find that particularly our students, sometimes they get a bit carried away with all the wonderful things that you can do with this fantastic new AI technology. And actually, some of them can lose sight of the fact that ultimately what we're trying to do in the health world is make sure that our patients get the information that they need. So we try to kind of be the bridge for that. Also staying alert to new media platforms. So there's one that was mentioned to me the other day, which I thought was Lemonade. I have since discovered it's at 8, and it's made by ByteDance, who are the company behind TikTok. So it looks very, very similar to TikTok. So it's already been touched upon this afternoon with the situation with TikTok. Will we keep it? Will we not? What's happening? Will it be owned by America? Will it still be owned by China? What are the implications? So all of that comes into trying to make sure that we pass on good media literacy habits to our users. Uncanny Valley. So this is a term that's often used within sort of AI and science fiction as well. And the series Black Mirror, so quite a lot of the episodes within all of those series actually look at how people can be taken in very easily by things that aren't real. We really, really need to work on that with the patients. We need to work on that with the clinicians. We definitely need to work on that with our students. We have within our organisation, and again, a lot of teaching hospitals have this, there is a mannequin called SimMan who can actually be programmed. And now it's still a little bit uncanny because you can actually make him speak. You can change his heart rate. There are all kinds of things you can do. It's used as a teaching aid. However, the positive aspect of that is that there are only a certain number of people who are trained to actually program that particular mannequin, and they are all medics and clinicians. So we know that they've got the experience and the knowledge behind them to actually make sure the information they're passing on is correct. And then the stakeholder engagement. So we work with 3 universities at the moment, and there's possibly a 4th who will be coming on board as well. And we need to make sure that they're also aware that when their students come to us, we need to make sure that what we're telling the students isn't contradicting what the universities are actually teaching them as well. So where next? So social media trends. I've seen a change in the last 9 months or so. So Twitter, that turned into X, I've seen a lot of organizations come off that and move across to Blue Sky. LinkedIn seems to be being used far more than it was certainly when I started looking into technology within libraries. The AI elephant in the library, so the AI is not going to go away. It'll evolve into something. A year from now, it will probably look very different to the way it does now. The walled garden approach is something that I've come across very, very recently. So the idea with that is that you will have AI elements, but the actual information will be taken from a database that is evidence-based. So it's been put together by experts. You can look at the references and they definitely exist. You can check out the references. So the walled garden approach, I think, may be one to watch as we go forward. And although I'm using healthcare as a background, this will apply to absolutely every discipline. It isn't only going to be health and science related. Virtual reality. So at the moment that seems to have stalled, which is interesting. So I guess that's a case of watch this space. Beware the algorithm echo chamber. This is also something we try to get across to our users. So one of the issues with social media in particular, and AI kind of amplifies that, is the fact that very often what the algorithms will do, if you can work out how they're working at all, because they change all the time, it will look at what you're interested in, and that's what it will feed back to you. So it's it really is like an echo chamber. And then, so the final thing I'm going to mention, I mentioned Generation Z, or Zoomers, as I've heard them called as well. So these are our pre-med students, and we see groups of them about twice a year. They come and they do some work experience with us, and they get an insight into what it's like to actually work in a hospital or a healthcare setting. And the last group that we had, I actually asked what they use for their healthcare information, expecting them to say TikTok, maybe some of the better known medical journals. Their main information source for healthcare information, and this is what made me realize we have a lot of work to do from a teaching perspective, they use ChatGPT. Okay, that's me.
Thank you so much, Paula. That was really interesting. We have time for one or two questions, and then we've got to move on to Dana Statton Thompson and Stephanie Beene, who will present on visual literacy. Here in the chat, what do you do when doctors or public health organizations are the ones actively spreading health misinformation, such as hand washing to stop COVID spread?
Yeah, we so when it is the medics, we basically try and educate them and suggest that they might like to look at this latest piece of research, or have they checked to see what our partner hospital down the road is doing. So a lot of it is, we rely very much on people coming and letting us know that that's actually happened, because then we can do something about actually putting the information correct, putting it right.
Awesome. One more question, and then the others you can answer in the chat in writing if you're able, Paula. Somebody asked about a term you used earlier, which is digital immigrants. Can you clarify what that term means as you understand it in the context of health information?
Yes. So this, when I was researching the book, I hadn't come across these terms before at all. But digital natives would be sort of later millennials. So I guess they'd be people who would be about maybe 30 now, if I think about it. So if you bear in mind that the internet became available to the sort of general public around about 1995-ish. As universities and educational organizations started to make it much easier to access, and also from an affordability perspective, you also had telecoms companies actually making it much more affordable as well than it had been. So I suppose when broadband and fiber started coming along, so digital natives are those who were born in a world where they've never known a world without the internet. They have never known a world without the internet at all. Their entire lives, they've had the internet helping them with their banking, helping them with their information, helping them with booking their travel. Digital immigrants would be people who'd be maybe my sort of age, so sort of late 40s, early 50s, who had to kind of learn all of these skills. So we can still remember, so my generation can still remember a world where you would use a manual typewriter and liquid paper. You didn't just hit a key on a keyboard and it would take your mistakes away. So that was and I put that into the chapters because I thought that was an interesting way of actually looking at it, because it's kind of like another country. The internet is like another country. It just happens to be a virtual one.
Absolutely. Well, again, Paula, thanks for a really fascinating and informative presentation. We have a few more questions for you in the Q&A window, so if you'll go ahead and start answering those there, that would be great. Thank you so much for showing up. I know it's evening your time, and we are really happy to have you. All right, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome now, Stephanie Beene and Dana Statton Thompson, here to present on visual literacy.
Stephanie, do you have it pulled up to share? You're still muted.
I do.
Okay, great.
Is it showing?
Yes. Perfect. We want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we can jump right in. But first, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Dana Thompson. I am a research and instruction librarian at Murray State University, and I've been doing research on visual literacy, really for the past 9 years. So I've worked with the ACRL Visual Literacy Task Force, as well as working with IVLA, which is the International Visual Literacy Association. Stephanie?
Yep. And I am Stephanie Beene, and I've worked with Dana for that entire time. And I am at the University of New Mexico. And we worked on the ACRL Visual Literacy Task Force together. And I've been working with visual literacy since 2009. Gosh, I'm not going to do the math for you. That's a really long time to be working with visual literacy. So without further ado, I will let Dana take it away.
Sure. Next slide. Okay, here we go. So yes, as part of the Visual Literacy Association, we had a meeting, and this is back in 2022, and a lot of visual literacy educators were talking about how there weren't lesson plans. There was a comment earlier, questions about practical lessons, and that's actually what our book is. We do have, yes, visual literacy, but there's media literacy lessons involved there as well. And so there really hasn't been until now with this book lesson plans on visual literacy, right? And those are based on existing standards and frameworks. So educators felt like it was this missing link, right? We really want visual literacy to be systematically included in the curricula. And so what we've done is we created this book with adaptable lesson plans on visual literacy for educators and librarians in higher education. So the focus is on undergraduate and graduate students, but if there are any K through 12 educators here, they are adaptable. So there's ways to modify them accordingly. So it is based on the visual literacy standards and the framework for visual literacy. The visual literacy competency standards for higher education were published in 2011. They were based off of the information literacy standards from 2001. And it stated that visual literacy is a set of abilities that enables an individual to effectively find, interpret, evaluate, use, and create images and visual media. So there were 7 standards. And visual literacy for libraries was the practical standards-based guide was published by the previous ACRL Visual Literacy Task Force. In 2022, we worked on the framework for visual literacy in higher education, and it is a companion document for the framework of information literacy. And we actually modified that definition, and the definition is provided as follows. And visual literacy is an interconnected set of practices, habits, and values for participating in visual culture that can be developed through critical, ethical, reflective, and creative engagement with visual media. So we kind of have these, a development of visual literacy, our understanding of visual literacy as the years have progressed, and we're kind of working with an interesting media sphere. Stephanie?
Thank you. And I just wanted to add just a caveat to, there's been a lot of discussion, as there should be in this presentation, about AI, and we did incorporate AI into the framework for visual literacy, and our lessons do incorporate AI as well. So I know that's been a big interest and driver in this presentation today. So just to plug for that. So the lessons, this is an example of how the lessons are organized. And this is a layout in the book for intermediate learners. And this is just an example. And this is one that Dana wrote for how manipulation affects our understanding of photography. Just an example. And the lessons, but all lessons are formatted this way. So it starts with a kind of a summary of what you can expect to find in the lesson and the takeaways and why it's important, and the appropriate disciplines that they can be utilized in, or what this lesson could be utilized in and how it can be adapted, as Dana was referencing. The mapped standards and frameworks, because we want to make sure that this is an accessible lesson, which that comes later. Any preparation that you might need to use this lesson, the instruction that takes place, and you'll notice it in the little gray bar that we talk about it being like a miniature lecture, or is it hands-on, etc. The accessible learning outcomes, like I mentioned, it needs to be accessible, or we felt it needed to be accessible. Any resources that you should expect to have available, references, we have citations in our lessons, and then any further reading. And then competency levels. And so this might feel very familiar to anybody, again, in our audience that works in kind of a K through 12 or education space. But if you work in maybe a higher education space, this might feel less familiar. Competency levels are talking about like novice learners. So these in an academic environment are typically first-year students or very early undergraduate students, but they may not always be. So this is whenever you're learning a new skill, topic, or practice, or a discipline for the first time. So maybe you have expertise in a certain area, but like think about when you're learning a new language, you are a novice in that area. Intermediate, like the last lesson plan, is that squishy in-between space. So we might think of liminality, right? The learners who are in in-between space. They're on their learning journey, but they're not there yet. In an academic environment, intermediate learners typically occupy the second and third year courses. The way that Dana and I handled this is that we used both the standards and the framework. And so that's an interesting space. The advanced students are those students who are typically enrolled in upper division courses, graduate and professional students, and those non-traditional students. And so Belinha talked about that quite a bit. Those are can be adult learners, and they bring a special set of competencies to our spaces. Dana?
One of the things that this book does is it focuses on, we say it's a slow approach. And so it's kind of like, well, what does that mean? And really, we wanted to harness this idea of the slow movement, right? And so that was a movement that evolved in the 80s. And it was actually like in Italy, because there was, they started getting McDonald's in Italy, and they were not pleased, the general public. And so there was kind of this return movement to slow and being intentional. And so it also had to do with attention. And now there's the slow movement is really there's slow travel, there's slow fashion, slow education. There's lots of, this movement has been adapted in lots of different spaces. And so when we were thinking about it, there was this concept about slow looking that we were both very familiar with. And having an art history background, having a photography background, it was something that was familiar. And so, yes, slow librarianship too, as Emily notes. So it has definitely infused a lot of different spaces. And so what we were thinking about are, what are the ways in which it's important for visual literacy to kind of connect with that slow movement? And so what we came up with were these ideas of slow looking, slow creating, and slow using. And the book is broken up into these 3 sections. So in these lessons, so there's 12 lessons in each section, and then they're broken up into the competency levels. And so this is when we're thinking about, how do we interact with what we're seeing, right? I like to, when I talk to my students about this, I talk about how fish don't realize that they're in water, right? So we don't always realize that the images that we're seeing on a daily basis, like, it's not really normal for millennia. This isn't how people interacted with images. And so we talk about, how do they cultivate an active awareness, right? Is it, instead of that mindless scrolling? And so what we want them to do is we want them to reflect on their automatic reactions and think about why they should turn their attention to visual information in the first place. One of those things that we try to talk to students is that visuals are information, And it's not just textual literacy that matters here, especially within a media environment.
And then another section of the book, I should say, deals specifically with slow creating. And creating was a really important aspect of when we authored with other co-authors, the framework for visual literacy, because we really believe that everyone, especially in this social media environment, this has been a big aspect of today's presentation with all of the authors today. We really believe that everyone is a creator now. In this participatory social media environment, people today are not just consumers, right? We're also creators. Whenever we participate, whenever we click, whenever we decide to share, whenever we're creating something, a TikTok video, an Instagram reel, we are creating, right? And so the aspect of slow creating, again, going back to what Dana was saying, is how can we be less mindless about that? Like, how can we create a pause before we share? In that participatory environment. So some of the lessons do presuppose some of that disciplinary knowledge. So there is one that I wrote about architecture students, because I work a lot with architecture students or photography students, right? And so that's where that disciplinary aspect comes in, that we're very upfront about. However, when we talk about all of us being creators, that's that slow creating aspect where we would like to instill some of that mindfulness in all of us as lifelong learners. And then another section of the book is slow using. Again, as Dana was saying about this kind of all of us being in the fish in this sea of images, sea of media, we encounter visuals everywhere. And in a world where images are delivered to us via these devices and wearables and algorithms tailored to our tastes and preferences and likes and interests, this is challenging, right? So we're encouraging our learners to carefully consider how and where they search and browse and select visuals. And I think that's been a recurring theme today as well. And so throughout the book, throughout these lessons, learners are encouraged to reflect upon their information needs and purposes and contexts throughout the process of searching, browsing, and integrating visual media into their lives.
So this is an example of a sample lesson. And so you can see there, like Stephanie indicated, so you can see what kind of lesson it's for. So novice learners listed at the top. This is 1.1. So this is the lesson that opens the book. And this is talking about introducing slow looking into the classroom. And this is a lesson that I give my intro to visual literacy students who are in the journalism department. And so this is just kind of an example of what an entire lesson would look like, right? So we give you guys, like Stephanie mentioned, all of those different sections of the lesson. And so this lesson in particular, we do know like it involves think, pair, share. It can take really 20 to 25 minutes. So the lessons are meant to be something that some of them are longer, 60 minutes, 75, depending on like instruction session times, right? Like you might not teach a 3-credit class. And so that's okay. These lessons can be incorporated as an instruction session lesson that if you're interested in this and you go into the classroom, you can really take everything you need right here and apply it. So most of them are illustrated by an image, or the image is a stand-in for some information. And then we outline the instruction for you. And then we have these kind of worksheets. Some of them are very short, as you can see in this example, but you can actually download them. There's a, oh, I don't remember what it's called on the back end. But Stephanie, do you remember? It's an entire folder that exists for this book where you can purchase, or sorry, you don't have to purchase. It's all available. It's Creative Commons licensed. It's all available for free. But
ALA has it. Yeah.
ALA has it, and you can download these, and then you can just print the worksheets. So that comes in pretty handy. Some of them are longer, much longer. So it's not like we would expect you to type it out or anything. But yeah, this is just an example of that sample lesson. And then I think we can move on to the next slide, Stephanie. I don't have anything, unless you do, to add here.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is going to the adaptability angle. We really wanted to be upfront and clear about any technology that you would need to implement these lessons. And so this one, we've left it up long enough for you to see that, like, the preparation, like a plan, what supplies may be necessary accordingly. So we really wanted to be intentional about, like, for those that might be teaching in under-resourced classrooms, for instance, if you need a internet connection, for instance, we're really intentional to spell that out. Okay, and then so in conclusion, the future of visual literacy is poised for significant transformation and expansion. Right? It's very hard. This has been a theme throughout today to predict what next year is going to look like, let alone 5 years from now. To predict how we're going to visually communicate, let alone how images or visual media is going to be delivered to us. With increasing access to internet connectivity, generative artificial intelligence, and new ethics for sharing and using information, especially online, it is more crucial than ever before to incorporate slow movement principles into daily practice and in our teaching. And these principles emphasize the importance of sustained attention and intention when engaging with visual information. So just to wrap up, slow looking encourages deep and thoughtful observation. Slow creating recognizes the democratization of visual content creation while encouraging reflection on positionality. And slow using highlights ethical considerations for using visual information and acknowledging the need for accessibility and equity. And there is our emails, our emails.
Yes.
If you'd like to get in touch with us.
It looked like there was a request for slides. Just shoot us an email. We can share those with you. Stephanie, there's a question for you in the chat. It says, would you consider high school novice competency level or not?
I would, it depends on the lesson and it depends on what you're teaching. I would not. I've taught, this is just a caveat, I've taught in middle school and high school levels. So I think it totally depends on the topic that you are teaching. I would not automatically assume that it's novice. That's a very short answer. I'm happy to expand on that if needed.
Sure. I want to thank you both before we go on shortly. I've got another question related to the part of your presentation about creators and how we're all creators now. As instructors, as people working in higher education and also giving guidance for people in public and school settings, how do you grapple with the idea that we're all creators, but many of us don't want to be? Like, how do we use the slow approach and consider other approaches when we are addressing an audience of people who are under a lot of pressure to think of themselves as creators, but are not necessarily on board with it?
I don't know. Do you want to take that one, Stephanie?
I know that's a really good question. And I was thinking about that as you were spelling it out for us, Ramon. That's an ethics question. So for me, myself, I made the choice, I think just within this last year or so, to get off of most social media. I'm not off of all social media. So I know that within this presentation that there was a discussion about Reddit rabbit holes. So I'm still on Reddit and I'm on Substack, and I had a conversation with a colleague about whether Substack was social media. So that was interesting. I guess I consider it social media, but they didn't. And so that was a whole conversation we had. But I'm not on TikTok, I'm not on Instagram, and I'm not on Facebook. And I thought that I would be very sad and heartbroken to finally break up with those social media platforms. But I had slowly been becoming less and less active with those platforms. So I guess it had been a very slow breakup. And I guess we finally got divorced, to use that, to extend that analogy. So I guess like from an ethical standpoint, and that's not to say that I'm not still a creator, because that pausing or that slowing down and that like, what is my level of participation going to be when I decide to share this piece of information, right? Or when I decide to share this video, or when I decide to share or like, or what is it going to be? And am I going to be anonymous, or am I going to be myself, or especially in a polarized environment? And I think that has to be something that you decide for yourself. And I think it gets, going back to Belina's presentation, I think it gets more emotionally charged right now. And especially as like an academic right now, like, I think it's a very personal question. And then when we're teaching our students, right now, in my unit, we do a lot of discussion about like, how do we frame it for our students when you get asked that question about like, well, what do you think about AI? And it's like, well, I guess that's the positionality piece that Dana was referring to with slow creating right now. Like, I think it's been very nice to just be honest and say, ethically, this is where I stand. You can make your own decision. And then it creates more of a conversation with the students. Dana, I'll let you answer if you feel comfortable.
Well, I just saw a question in the Q&A that I just wanted to address quickly. It says, what feedback have you gotten from users of these lesson plans? They seem really helpful. And the feedback has been good. So these are lessons that we developed in our classrooms and tried out. They're kind of tried and true. And so we've gotten good feedback, but they are really adaptable. So, and I hate to keep using that same word, but it is kind of like a choose your own adventure. You can choose your own images that you want, if it calls for an image or a video, or we give you examples of what we think would be appropriate, but we've gotten good feedback on the lessons themselves, and people say that they're easy to use. So I would appreciate if you happen to purchase or look at a sample lesson and want to provide us with feedback, please do so. We'd love to hear how it's worked for you.
Absolutely. Let's definitely keep the conversation going with the email addresses that Dana and Stephanie have so graciously provided. The presentation was wonderful, really informative like each of the other presentations. And we've got just one left from a familiar face, the always reliable Scott Spicer. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Got my presentation up. So I'm gonna go to share screen. Let's see here. Can everybody see my screen? I'm good. All right. Thank you. I mean, this has been an awesome book talk. This is great. If anybody's interested in my slides, I made a Z-link, as we call it, the University of Minnesota, z.umn.edu, Media Literacy Book Panel 25. There are some things in this presentation that I'm not going to have time to show, but you're able to go back and take a look at on your own. So today I'm going to be talking about promoting media literacy with user-created media projects. And I'll bring a little bit of the social aspects into it as well. So the first thing I want to say is perhaps different. I perhaps come from a different tradition in terms of media literacy than the other speakers. I come from the media arts education tradition. pretty strictly. I'm a strong believer that user created or student created media can be a catalyst, including critical media literacy and getting people to think about issues. And some of the topics that, for example, Belinha was describing, humanity, um, engaging with each other, searching for the truth, finding your truth. I think a media project is, and we just heard about slow creation a second ago, can be really a great catalyst for those kinds of things. While I am consider myself a liberal progressive, one of my core values, as I'll demonstrate in this presentation, is that these projects, these media, whether it's a podcast or a video, a website, a virtual reality experience, an AI created, generated media work, can all be catalysts for learning about multiple perspectives and getting out and talking to people and having some introspection and thinking about where you're situated in those broader conversations. So that's one of the things that really attract me to media. And today I'm not just speaking about the classroom because I know there's some public librarians here. I'm also just thinking about your user community. Now, usually I would show a video on student voices. I've created a montage that illustrates some of this potential, but given time, I'm just going to continue through. If you want to go back and watch this montage, you're more than welcome to. So what is student created or what is user created media? These examples come from my time when I was doing a fellowship at the Institute of the Environment, so they are sustainable examples. Um, but basically, there's a wide variety of genres, and they can be applied to various different topics. So, a documentary style digital story is one. That's kind of a personal narrative, video investigation, which is multi-perspectival. They can be used as an educational resource to bring awareness. I just watched one yesterday on the climate impacts of AI, for example, that was done by a young person. Looked like a student project. I think that's a great tool, a great approach. Field studies, so demonstrating your knowledge on something. Personal narrative, digital story. I talked about introspection a minute ago. So having that opportunity to reflect and to share your perspective. These are all very, very different. And then, of course, there's solutions. Yep. And then thinking about the PSA and then thinking about different modalities. So that's video. Of course, we have the ArcGIS story maps if we want to get into geospatial. And then increasingly popular are the podcasts. And then, of course, within both story maps and podcasting. And I'll add to this, but the immersive experiences with VR, XR, spatial computing creation, a subgenres that incorporate all of these genres that were previously described in VR. Let's see if I can get back here. All right. So that's kind of an overview of different types of media projects. Now, when I work with instructors, or if you are just if you're a public librarian working with a community member, I have to figure out what the potential is. Like what could we really, what would optimize the potential of this creation, of this work? And it starts just like librarianship 101. It starts with information. You have to have good information. And one of the possibilities, like I mentioned, the potential is getting good information and taking that information and developing your own perspectives on that knowledge after you've done your research and reflecting here and throughout the process. And maybe if it's a complex issue, what kind of solutions would I like to see? You know, I heard somebody say about our politics. So many of us agree on the same things, but we disagree on the solutions. And this process of creating media can get at, you know, what your beliefs are and what you believe the solution should be. And then finally, you put that together, you communicate your ideas, and then maybe you take action on that wherever your truth takes you, right? As long as you've had a rigorous process, if that truth takes you to a different position than my own, fine. I might not agree with you, but you've gone through this whole process of introspection and you've moved into action. And the reason why I like action is it moves you into a transformative process, especially in an educational context. You know, thinking about students in academics, for example, in academia, getting internships in graduate school, deciding that they want to do more in-depth study, maybe going on to grad school. I'm sorry, move into a different area. Maybe they change their behavior because they learn about the impacts of fast fashion, for example. They buy secondary clothing or they make their own. They develop technical skills, which are vital for today. And they learn how to think critically. If you're talking about in a public library perspective, they might have a different rhetorical context, they might have a different audience of purpose, but they can still develop their viewpoints. They can still bring awareness in their groups. Maybe all of this creation fosters new discussions, maybe online, yes, in some of those social media platforms, but maybe offline, maybe in public forums. We've seen a lot of these district in the political realm. We've seen a lot of these representatives talking to their constituents, and maybe some of this media can be a form of discussion. Here's some additional kinds of transformative effects in the educational realm. So there's innovative teaching, there's innovative public librarianship. As we've described today, there's information media, digital, visual literacies. A lot of the core values of librarianship are embedded in creating media projects. So research and copyright and fair use, academic integrity. Libraries service value, so demonstrating the value of our services and moving into some of these emerging technologies. Co-scholarship and relationship building, having close relationships with our community members. Student outreach, getting students out of the classroom and into the community, getting young people. A lot of the digital storytelling and the history of the Story Center comes from the community. So getting them out into the community and talking to people, especially people who have different points of view. We need that today, the better angels kind of thing. We need that today more than ever before. And then, of course, people advocating, that activist piece that I mentioned earlier for the causes they believe in, whatever they are. And so creating media that speaks to their beliefs or even just informs individuals. So why should libraries support user-created media? As I mentioned, media literacy skill set development, engaging in project-based learning, I think is a very effective tool. I mentioned transformative effects, innovative teaching, innovative librarianship, evolved roles of librarianship, meeting community needs. So in this case, business owners, maybe they want to create promotional materials, nonprofits, other professionals, promoting civic engagement, including social causes. And getting back to we mentioned news in the description of today's event. So as people engage in deeper and deeper process of creating media, they can then sort of continue to refocus their own worldview, their lens, and then they can align that lens with the news sources that they're hearing from. And I see that a lot in the classroom and the students that I work with. That to me is critical media literacy. And that is how media arts education and critical media literacy meet. That's the intersection when you go deeper into some of this, some of these media projects. What about the evolved roles of librarianship? Well, I'm neurodivergent. I work on a lot of neurodivergent issues. I'm ADHD. I don't like doing the same thing all the time. So being a media outreach librarian is perfect for me because I'm always looking at the next thing and I'm always strengthening the services we have around the last thing. So the last thing was moving from analog media creation to digital media creation. And then, as you'll see in a minute, moving on to VR and AI. So we can change. We can start being part of this media creation processes. We just heard a moment ago in the video, in the visual literacy. We can be part of the ideation process. We can be giving feedback on some of the media projects as we've been doing with a lot of written works of our users for forever. And of course, we can help on our research. I won't go over this, but here are a bunch of questions that you can ask if you're consulting with individuals who are creating media. It's not unlike a reference interview, to be honest. It's just a little bit tweaked to consider a lot of the sort of technical aspects and the legal aspects and the compositional aspects of media creation in whatever modality. Here are some of the sort of nitty-gritty of getting into media creation. So obviously computing, iMovie, Adobe Premiere. I'd add on the PC side, CapCut is becoming increasingly popular, as is Clipchamp. The C's always get to me. I can never remember them. That's I believe a Microsoft product. Audacity is a freely available audio product. Google Sites is good for creating websites, QuickTime ScreenFlow, very user friendly. If you want to go higher end, we have Final Cut Pro X, DaVinci, Avid Systems. There's a lot of other tools. You have to kind of take a pulse of where you're at as an institution and where your depth of expertise lies within your organization. We also check out equipment. We no longer have camcorders. We've moved to mirrorless cameras. Right now, we're using the Nikon Z30s, which take up to 2 hours of video footage. It's great. We got rid of the consumer line video cameras. They're kind of going out of style. They're harder to get. We also have some DSLRs. We check out tripods. We have digital audio recorders. We have the Blue Yeti microphone, which is used frequently for podcasts. These are all beginner to mid-level equipment. Now at our institution, I'm a media outreach librarian. I have relationships with all the other units on campus who do specialized media and journalism, for example, or broadcasting, communication. So if somebody needs something high-end, I can sometimes get them help. But by and large, the people that I work with are happy with the equipment we have. We have 4 different locations for our loaner pools. I coordinate the equipment and I've worked together with our circulation staff across the board. And we have a one collection model. So on any given day, you can find the equipment on our campus. And they're integrated into our catalog just like a book. So you can see whether our equipment is available before you head out to one of those branches. We have a bunch of media capture spaces, but they tend to be beginner to mid-level. They're not the high-end studios. So we have one button studios. We have some video studios that we have some screens and whatnot. And people use higher end studios at other institutions. And then we do have like a small audio recording studio. And like I mentioned earlier, there are other studios on campus. In terms of support, I work with students, and then I have two to three media ambassadors, student staff, who can help out supporting students in our library spaces. They can sign up to make an appointment, or in the past and maybe going forward, we have some drop-in hours if somebody has a quick question. I also, during COVID, we got very good at providing media creation support over Zoom and Google Hangouts. I would say the bulk of our consultations actually take place online now. Even the technical skills like iMovie, I can do online now. And then I go into the classroom quite often. I'm also, my background is librarianship and instructional design. I have a second master's in curriculum instruction. So I help with instructors across the board design media assignments and develop ways of assessing media with those core values that I mentioned earlier, like critical thinking and being multi-perspectival and being engaged with the community. And we look at those things in assessing student projects. I also go to classrooms and I teach workshops and that kind of thing. Speaking of which, I teach workshops in the classroom. I teach library hosted workshops. Right now, I'm working on a series of AI media literacy workshops, possibly a badging course in the spring. And I'm hoping to develop that as a national product that we can use. During COVID, people couldn't check out equipment. They couldn't get out of their house in some places. So we developed in guides, which we have on our website, to do it yourself with your own equipment, with your phones or what have you. And we provided remote course support. So sometimes I get zoomed in even today, or a course is fully online and I can come into that class. I'm meeting with a high school teacher today and I'm going to be zoomed into their class. So I do a lot of public outreach, not just in the library. So my job is engagement outreach and community partnerships. Increasingly, I'm working with nonprofits and other community groups to provide media support at some level. And I do remote individuals consultation. It's really important that we bring visibility to our user work, that we respect our user work. So I design online media project galleries. You can go to z.umn.edu/lib media, and you can see a bunch of media projects from there. We host media project exhibits in library spaces. You saw actually another one just a minute ago on the sustainability media. We showcase media projects and publications, obviously the book that I wrote and different conferences, the conversation we're having today. And the value of doing this is it amplifies user-created work. You can imagine today, going back to the Better Angels example I mentioned earlier, if the person wants to create a documentary in a community describing their point of view, but interviewing people of a different point of view, and trying to give multiple perspectives in their documentary and showing that documentary and then having a conversation, right? We can bring that humanity that we've lost back into the conversation using media. This is that whole story center approach, which used to be, that used to be called the Center for Digital Storytelling, right? That whole approach of youth created media, of community created media, and fostering discussion with each other. So looking into the future, about 15% of my time is dedicated to our VR program, which is headed by my colleague, Charlie Hines, who used to be in the media services program. I spent a great deal of time in this space over the last 4 years, working in virtual, augmented, mixed reality a lot, and spatial computing. So that's spatial computing is what Apple calls their VR. We have the Apple Vision Pro, and it's a totally different type of VR, but they don't call it VR. If you ever have a chance, I can give a whole nother talk in this area to talk about spatial computing. You would see why. Now, I've worked a little bit. I've published on user-generated immersive experiences. I've worked with a retail merchandising class, for example, along with Charlie, where they created grocery stores in SketchUp and Enscape. And we have 360 video cameras and headsets that we check out. But we also purchase a lot of equipment, and or a lot of software and simulation software, and that's what we're doing now. So I do a lot of work in trying to understand the great potential. I work on considerations for ethical obligations. So using these tools for empathy, I do a lot of research, and then I considered increasingly intersections with AI. I've seen a lot of great potential of AI, especially in the medical fields, going back earlier to some of our earlier conversations on the potential of AI, and in the health sciences, in particular with surgery and identifying cancers. But you got to be really careful. There's some indirect misinformation in the way AI is done and with radiological imaging and that kind of thing. So it's still a very nascent area. I don't want to speak out of turn here because I'm not an expert, but from my understanding, there's still some work. I know it's being used in practice, though, clinical practice. As mentioned earlier, I'm also knee deep these days in AI media literacy, AI generative media. I have there's a pretty big helping. You can see my two girls, Viva and Vixie, see at Spicer with their cups of coffee. They had a case of the Mondays. Um, there's a lot of potential. I think I'm not one of those naysayers that say there's no potential for AI generative images and audio and video and presentations and podcasts and voiceovers, animation, all of it. But there's a healthy dose of ethical obligations. I'm a faculty fellow at the Center for Climate Literacy. I've been doing climate work for a long time and at the intersection of media projects, of youth-created media. I'm worried about its impact on the environment. I'm very much worried about copyright and how a lot of authors and artists' work has been is being used without their permission to generate this information. I'm tremendously concerned about the human exploitation that goes into developing those large language models that folks have used. So some of you might be familiar with the Time article on the Kenyans who were paid $2 an hour, uh, tens of thousands, I think. I could be wrong, now have PTSD, not unlike the moderation that Facebook was paying for in human moderation before, who also have PTSD. There's no free lunch. A lot of what we do on a daily basis is built off the back and the labor of other people. It's systemic. And I believe that before we move into, you know, playing with these tools, folks have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to teach others about how this technology got here, what the implications are for its use today, what the implications are for use tomorrow. But I'm also realistic. We talked about locking phones away. Well, we're not going to be able to lock AI generated media away. It's just a fact of life. So how do we mitigate it? What about green AI? I'd love to talk about AI. What about ways that we can look at small language models, for example, and looking at other ways that we can reduce some of that harm, right? And bring awareness to the possibilities of AI. I'm also worried about creative roles and issues related to critical thinking and Western ethnocentric aesthetics and a whole lot of other issues that we'll be talking about more in my work in our workshops and maybe hopefully some publications. So it's also important, especially in these new and developing areas that we do research and scholarship, that we remain curious as practitioners and that our users remain curious about its potential because a lot of these things we don't know. And as we develop our knowledge around these creations and we develop our knowledge around these services that we publish and we share out like I'm doing right now, and that we continue to remain curious and that we do studies. Going forward. Here's some information if you want to purchase my book, which talks a lot about these things. And here's my contact information. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And I'm going to go back to the other screen.
Thank you
Are
so
there
much,
any
Scott.
questions? Sorry, that was quite a lot.
No, it was great. That was wonderful as always. I have a question for you right off the bat about something that I know has interested you for a long time, and you've been doing a lot of research on it lately. How do you, or what takeaways do you have for people who are working with patrons or with students who are neurodiverse, based on your experience or based on your observations as of late? And especially as it pertains to media literacy and using media equipment responsibly.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question. My BA is in child psychology. I went to school to work with neurodivergent people because I had neurodivergence. I thought I could be good at it, and it was hard. Um, I've learned, even if people don't tell me, I can tell to some extent when people present, like autistic, for example. And I worked very hard on situational awareness. So I'm never disrespectful, but I might slow things down depending on how they present. And if I'm consulting with them, and I just have to take a breath and I have to make myself be present in that moment, which you should always do, but you understanding the way in which people process information is very valuable. I've also had people with all their kinds of disabilities, spatial and like different, like I've had to help them with doing, but sometimes being their media editor, for example. I worked with somebody who had these kinds of tactile functional challenges. So I think our ADHD, if somebody's like moving very quickly, I'll start speaking a little bit slower. I'll soften my voice a little bit so that I don't, because I know I know that high energy kind of feeling. So I'll try to just model things, take it step by step. I also will try, unlike what I just did, probably knowing the time, I'll try not to pack too much information in. I'll try to simplify things sometimes. Um, I'll try to say, let's spread this out over a couple meetings so that we don't get ahead of ourselves, right? But I'll also try to channel that enthusiasm and that passion that these folks have. Sometimes that we can actually, I'll go down, we already mentioned rabbit hole, so I'll go down that rabbit hole. I love it. I love all these subjects. So I'll just talk to them, right? A lot of what I do today has nothing to do with the technology. It has a lot to do with the ideation. It's like that reference thing. We'll talk. You've got a perception on Gaza versus Israel. You've got a perception on the Ukraine, in Russia. You've got a perception on this. Let's grab, a coffee. Let's talk about it. How are we going to make this into your podcast? How are we going to make this into a video? How are you going to lay out your website to share your feelings? So I adjust.
Absolutely. And I think there's a definite tie-in between the approaches that you're recommending and what our other presenting authors have discussed today in terms of empathy, a slow approach, and the idea that anybody can be a digital immigrant, which Paula Younger got into a bit. Well, that is all the time that we have today. We are nearing the second hour. So I want to thank you again, Scott, and thank our other presenters, Belinha, Stephanie, Dana, and Paula, for their amazing presentations, which you can all view again later today on the main ALA YouTube channel. And in addition to that, if you enjoyed today's presentation or if you enjoy storytelling, you should sign up for next month's webinar, which will be held on November the 13th, I should say. And here is the link for that event. Again, thanks all, and I will hopefully see many of you again on November 13th. Have a great rest of the day.